We are completing our 18th weekend, and today is our 36th class in quantum psychotherapy. And our topic today is ethical considerations in quantum psychotherapy through the zero-point coherent field lens. The ethics of zero-point work are rooted in radical humility. By remaining at zero, the therapist ensures that the healing remains in the client's own achievement. And the call is not to change the client, but to provide a coherent space where the client feels safe enough to change themselves. So, ethical considerations in quantum psychotherapy, viewed through the zero-point field and coherent field lens, center on balancing the profound, often unmapped potential of energy healing with the rigorous standards of established clinical practice. So, because this modality bridges subatomic theory and psychological healing, it requires a new type of context-specific practical ethics. Those foundational ethical principles. And the first one is aspiration ethics, where practitioners are encouraged to go beyond the flow of minimum legal requirements to an aspirational sailing of the highest professional service. The second is the sacred contract. The practitioner-client bond is often viewed as a sacred contract within the field of the heart, requiring extreme mindfulness, not to blur ethical boundaries while assessing deeper levels of consciousness. And the third is informed consent as an ongoing process. So unlike a one-time surgical waiver, consent in quantum psychotherapy is a continuous dialogue, and this must include, first and foremost, clear disclosure that quantum healing is often considered complementary rather than replacement for conventional medical treatment. And next, because managing placebo effects, where informing a client of potential negative energy shifts might inadvertently cause those outcomes. So the nocebo effect is the evil twin of the placebo effect. It occurs when a person's negative expectations or beliefs about a treatment lead to a real harmful outcome or worsening symptoms, even if the treatment itself is inert like a sugar pill. So that's why, as counseling psychologists who are using the quantum approach, we have to ensure that the observer effect, how we expect the outcome to come, has to come from the observation we choose to hold. So let's look through the ethical considerations in quantum psychotherapy. Holding a zero-point coherent field in a therapeutic setting introduces a unique set of ethical responsibilities that transcend traditional clinical boundaries. Because this practice involves the intentional manipulation of a shared energetic or informational space, it requires a rigorous ethical framework centered on agency, transparency, and non-attachment. So the first ethical considerations is the power balance of entanglement. In quantum psychotherapy, the therapist's internal state serves as a master oscillator for the client. And this creates a profound responsibility. If a therapist holds a field, why harboring their own unresolved shadow material or unconscious biases, they risk infecting the client's field through entanglement. And ethical practice demands an unprecedented level of practitioner self-regulation where the therapist must remain a 0 point, a neutral void to ensure they are not inadvertently imposing their own psychic frequency onto the client. The second ethical consideration is informed consent in the unseen. How does one provide informed consent for a process that occurs below the level of conscious dialogue? So ethical practitioners must find ways to explain the quantum nature of the intervention in plain language. And this means that clients should understand that the therapy involves resonant presence and that their own biological and energetic systems may respond to the therapist's coherence. So true consent must include the client's right to opt out of field work and stick to traditional cognitive behavior methods if they feel uncomfortable with the subtle energetic shift. The third ethical principle is the trap of the healer ego. The most significant ethical risk is the inflation of the therapist ego. Holding a coherent field can produce miraculous shifts in a client state, which can lead to therapists to view themselves as a healer with special powers. And ethical integrity requires maintaining the 0 point perspective, and the therapist is merely a neutral witness, providing the conditions for the client's own system to self-organize. So any attempt to force a specific outcome violates the client's quantum sovereignty. The fourth is navigating the anti-Zeno effect. Ethically, the therapist must be aware of the quantum Zeno effect, constantly measuring or checking for specific results can freeze a client in their current state of suffering. This is what Zeno effect means. Let me explain it more fully. The quantum Zeno effect, also known as the Turing paradox, is the phenomena where a quantum system is prevented from changing because it is being observed too frequently. A quantum system is prevented from changing because it is being observed too frequently. In short, a watched pot never boils. A watched pot never boils. So a quantum Zeno state where extremely frequent observation freezes a system in its initial state can be disastrous. So whether a system slows down, which is Zeno, or speeds up, which is anti-Zeno, it depends on how frequently it is measured relative to its dynamics. So to continue, the fourth is navigating, we've seen that navigating the anti-Zeno effect. So now let's look at the clinical and practitioner accountability. The scope of practice. Practitioners won't diagnose, treat, or prescribe unless they hold a specific medical license. They operate under a voluntary code of ethics rather than a state-enforced standard of care. Competence and training. Ethical practice requires technical competence in quantum methodologies alongside a fundamental understanding of mental health conditions. Power dynamics. Therapists have to be aware of the coercive power inherent in the relationship, especially when clients are in altered states of consciousness where they may be highly suggestible. Let's now look at risks and safeguards. The risk of delay. The most pressing ethical concern is the potential for a client to delay evidence-based conventional treatment for severe conditions in favor of quantum-only interventions. Vulnerability in the field. Because quantum psychotherapy can induce non-ordinary states of consciousness, practitioners have to act trustworthy. They have to act as trustworthy observers who do not exert undue influence. Accountability in unregulated fields. Since there are no state-issued guidelines for most energy modalities, practitioners use self-adopted codes of ethics as their primary line of defense against miscommunication or liability. So an informed consent that specifically addresses these energetic and quantum concepts is vital. And this document is designed to bridge the gap between traditional clinical expectations and the specific nuances of quantum psychotherapy. It ensures that the client is aware of the nonlinear energetic nature of the work while maintaining their quantum sovereignty. So the nature of the intervention is such that the client has to understand that this practice incorporates principles of quantum physics and bioenergetic coherence. So unlike traditional talk therapy alone, this approach recognizes that the therapist maintains a 0-point signature coherent field, a state of focused neutral presence intended to serve as a harmonic template for the client's own self-regulation. So the role of the observer. The client has to acknowledge that in the quantum system, the act of observation influences the outcome. So this form is drafted in a way that the client has to say the following. I acknowledge that in a quantum system, the act of observation influences the outcome. I understand that the therapist's role is to provide a clean observational field, and the process is designed to help collapse fragmented emotional states into a more integrated and coherent personal signature. And this document has to be signed before the commencement of any intervention. And concerning entanglement and resonance, the client has to specify, I understand during sessions, a state of energetic entanglement may occur. My thoughts, my emotions, physiology may begin to resonate with the therapist's state of coherence. And I recognize this is a collaborative, not invasive process aimed at facilitating my own innate healing intelligence. And then the client has to sign, and you also countersign. So, quantum sovereignty and agency. It involves non-interference. And this is where the client states, I maintain full authority over my own energetic field. The therapist's role is to hold the space, not the force a specific change or fix me. The right to decoherence. I reserve the right to experience my own process at my own pace. And I understand that healing is not linear and that stuckness is sometimes a necessary part of my system's evolution. As far as withdrawal of consent is concerned, I may request to shift back to traditional cognitive methods or terminate the field work at any time if the energetic resonance feels uncomfortable or intrusive. And concerning risks and observations, I am aware of the quantum Zeno effect, where over monitoring or watching the port, which is my process, can lead to a temporary plateau in progress. I agree to work with the therapist to balance active focus with open awareness to allow for spontaneous shifts. I also understand that as my field becomes more coherent, I may experience temporary detox symptoms as old incoherent patterns are released. And lastly, concerning practitioner self-regulations, the therapist now commits to a rigorous practice of personal coherence and ethical neutrality, and this ensures that the field being held is free from the therapist's personal biases or unresolved noise, providing the clearest possible space for my growth. So the client signs, and the date is put, and the practitioner, who is the therapist, also signs, and the date is put. So are you considering becoming an energy healer? If so, we are putting together a class that I will give you briefly in our next class. Thank you very much for listening.